There's a huge emphasis on literacy and numeracy in schools when that isn't the full picture. If you know how to read, but you don't know how to manage your emotions, like, you're going to be in an interesting spot. Are you building cabinets or are you tending a garden? Because a cabinet requires the absolute expertise and finesse of a cabinet maker, whereas I think a child truly is more like a garden where the DNA is all there. That plant is going to grow. It is made to grow. You just need to make sure that nothing kills it outright.
Thanks for tuning into the Art of ADHD. I'm your host, Liam Park. On today's episode, we're getting outside the box with educator Nygel Metcalfe. Nygel is the founder of the Heartwood School, an outdoor forest school for kids who are also homeschooled. It focuses on the core competencies, social and emotional learning. In this episode, we discuss culture and how cultivating values can impact our development with ADHD. I hope you enjoy the show. Welcome to the show, Nygel. I'm so excited to have you here. I'm excited to have a conversation today.
Yeah.
Let's just jump into tell me about the Heartwood School. Tell me what you're doing.
Sure. So Heartwood is a school. It's like a satellite school or like a campus of what's called Navigate NIDES. So NIDES is the online school out of School District 71. And if there's a group of home learners in a certain area outside of that district, then they can form a Heartwood school and do in-person programming alongside their home learning.
Okay.
And so that's kind of where I come in. I'm like the liaison teacher for the home learning environment, helping them get set up, suggesting resources, doing the paperwork, connecting the dots with the district, but then also providing that 1 day of in-person programming for the students.
Okay. So some sort of hybrid thing of homeschool, official school.
Yep.
Yeah. So how often are kids meeting? If they're homeschooled, they're not there all the time.
Nope. So it's 1 day of the week.
Yeah.
With a similar aged cohort.
Okay.
And then I run a few of those. And so we call it Deer Clan meets on Tuesdays, and that's K1s.
Yeah.
Flicker Clan is 2-3s. They meet on Wednesdays. And Mountain Goat Clan.
Yeah.
Yeah. Which the kids chose their clan names based on what they feel like their personality was connected to an animal, which was pretty fun.
And so you guys meet outside? Is that right?
Yes. The program days are largely shaped by the individual running them. And so I went with a forest school inspired kind of program and inquiry-based learning, land-based learning. We're just trying to be a little more old school, a little more in touch with the land, in touch with ourselves.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that's cool because, we speak in metaphors and cliches in our world, and there's the idea, think outside the box. But there is sort of a literalism and a truth that I think underlies these things.
Okay.
And the regular school box, it's a box. Mm-hmm. And it conditions a certain way of thinking. What do you think's different about, why did you choose to meet outside? It gets cold here.
Yeah. Definitely. Well, I would say that I was encountering, I've never been a super outdoorsy guy in my background. It was challenges in the box that I was butting up against constantly that led me to look for other environments or other setups for both my own teaching, because my own mental health and my own ways of being weren't a good fit for the box. Yeah. And also it was quite apparent that a lot of the kids were, struggling with that same thing. So it was kind of the challenges of the classroom that led me to doing outdoor learning.
Yeah. Tell me a bit more about the challenges. A lot of people with ADHD, school's not exactly a wonderful environment for them. What was school like for you growing up?
Well, ironically, it was great. I loved it.
Okay.
And that's because, I think largely because I was homeschooled initially.
Yeah.
Right. So I got a very supportive and not super draining experience in my elementary school years. And then so when I got into, it was a private school setting, but a public environment, I wasn't burnt out from 9 years of clerical work.
Yeah.
So middle school was fun for me. I enjoyed learning. I had a pretty good memory, so I wouldn't have to kill myself studying.
Yeah.
I could largely just listen to, the class, and then I tested well too. So there is like some of these random, the roll of the dice genetically,
Yeah.
mentally. I did get some advantages in a school setting,
Yeah.
and so I don't know. Sometimes it's partially that.
I wonder, was that any way a double-edged sword for you? Like, because I see, for me too, I also tested well, and I understand. Like, I've seen a lot of memes and stuff in the ADHD space online talking about like, hey, former gifted kids, how are you doing? Because like when we're praised on these intelligence and accomplishment, that doesn't always pan out well. Like, how'd it go for you?
Yeah, I definitely connect with that of like feeling immense potential and not necessarily seeing it pan out. Like I remember a distinct moment in my teens, maybe my early 20s, where I was like, I'm not famous. I was convinced I would be famous.
Yeah.
Because like I was prolific and like very quick to like make connections. So all of these things that whatever environments were like looking for and rewarding, it came naturally. But then execution, planning, and follow through, a lot of the things that like a big project requires, or like, long-term accomplishments in some ways.
Yeah.
Some of those like other skills were a little bit lacking. And I just remember that moment. I'm like, look back, like how silly is that? Who the statistics of getting famous is low, but it was just this kind of feeling and confidence that I had.
It's probably pretty relatable though too. Like I know I wanted to be a rock star, and probably nowadays more than ever with social media, people are like they want to be an influencer or they want to be a rapper, rocker, like they want to be famous for something. And a lot of people probably, they're getting rewarded. They think they could.
Yeah.
So how did that happen? Like what wall did you hit that made you realize, oh crap, I'm not famous?
Well, I just woke up one day and realized I wasn't famous.
Just simple.
Yeah. I think, to do with, so thinking of like teaching is a difficult field to be in, and that could be part of where that like divergence in the path is like you talked about, sort of the theme being the art of ADHD. And I was thinking of it in kind of on two levels. One being how I approach art as a person with ADHD. And I think a lot of ADHD people tend to have a lot of like creative expression and like tend to lean into that. And so I have sort of that, but also just the art of like succeeding. Yeah. The different coping strategies that everyone finds and cobbles together and maybe even contorts themselves to like survive. Yeah. So I guess I'm losing my train of thought a little bit, but just in terms of, I think my pursuit of art had like a bit of a trajectory, but then other pursuits like teaching were very demanding and I wasn't performing as highly. Yeah.
Yeah, it's hard to be an adult.
A little bit. But you're also like finding me, or like this conversation comes at an interesting kind of point in my life, because I think there was a time when I was just, single and my responsibilities were low and feeling prolific. But then there was a time when, teaching was highly demanding and I started taking ADHD medication. And if you had talked to me soon after that, I would have said it was a game changer. Yeah. I think it was. I think I can say it was a game changer. But I thought I had found kind of the silver bullet. Yeah. For like, okay, efficacy, follow through. And it supported me in a lot of ways. But strangely enough, in the last like 2 years, it's sort of become unhelpful.
Yeah. Yeah, I think I'm grateful for like when I took meds, I think it helped me build some foundational habits or recognize some patterns of behavior a little bit more clearly. Yep. But nothing is without side effects, and there's always this cost benefit calculation, and it gets confusing too, because like as you normalize your brain to different levels of certain neurochemicals, it's possible the med's not doing as much, and you might need to change your dose. You might need to change your med.
Yeah.
And then are you just chasing some, thing that's always going away?
Yeah. Because definitely when I started, it was like this euphoric experience for a day.
Yeah.
And yeah, I don't know what's going on a chemical level because, I've reduced the dose like every year for the past few years and then stopped taking it. And then when I go on even the lowest dose for like some kind of boost for like a hard work week or something, it just doesn't work the same way. I feel stressed.
Yeah.
Like my nerves are shot.
Yeah. So,
but I think some of the grooves were sort of established a little bit when I had the juice to be able to kind of, maybe see some of my patterns or like just deal with some of the things that were holding me back.
yeah.
Like an example for me was there was this pile of papers beside my bed. And because if something's out of sight, then I lose track of it completely.
Yep.
So I purposefully place this, stack of papers beside my bed so I will trip over it every night and every morning. But inevitably, I just start to that becomes routine as well. So it never actually gets dealt with.
Yeah.
So then in the first few weeks of taking the meds, I wouldn't say that anything really felt different except like the pile of papers was gone.
Yeah.
And it had been there for like 16 months.
Yeah.
So it was just like the me that I always thought that I was, but just able to execute on my intentions a little better. But I think that created some ridges that I'm able to kind of act on now without the meds as well.
Yeah. I wonder, one of the things I want to explore in this is about the education system because, I haven't, I'm interested in history. I haven't done a super deep dive. But from what I understand, the modern education system, what we are all familiar with if we've been to public school or even most private schools, is based on this Prussian model that was after Napoleon battled the Prussians, they needed more soldiers.
Right.
They needed disposable people who could just follow orders, and they regimented school and standardized it. And that spread around the world as the new educational model to create soldiers and then later factory workers, people who could comply, people who could, when the bell rings, you move.
Yeah.
It's a very Pavlovian, very rigid structure.
Yes.
And I think, there's certain kinds of brains, like ADHD brains, that seem naturally resistant to this structure. What is the ethos of the Forest School? How do you see that? Does it have the rigid structure? Is there a bell that rings at Forest School?
No. I mean, I think, that industrial model kind of view of education has been espoused, I think, fairly widely enough that people have heard it.
Yeah.
Most people have heard that. And I definitely agree with it. There's so many aspects of the school system that, mimic those sort of factory conditions. And some of it is, I don't know, I guess you could argue sensible in terms of logistics, because it is hard to control large groups of people and to make them, do things and follow orders. Yeah. So bells, I understand why the model exists, but it is not conducive to well-being of humans or good learning.
Yeah.
So I think oftentimes we confuse sort of is it working? How effective is it? What do we mean? Are we able to, enforce compliance, or are we stimulating thinking and, critical thinking and exploring of your own values and other things we might point to for the goals of education? But the results are there to some extent. That's why it's still used, because it is effective by some criteria.
Yeah.
So the Forest School model definitely moves away from the rigidity. There's still, communication and structure.
Yeah.
I ring a gong
Yeah.
when I want everyone to assemble because, I need the sound to carry throughout the woods.
Yeah.
So there's still, I don't know, there's an analog to a bell, but it's different. And I think that when you go down the rabbit hole of trying to, well, I guess maybe anyone in their exploration of themselves and how to live well and what habits are supporting me, I want to be healthy. for me, it was like ADHD and trying to understand ADHD. I find that really what I have sort of come up against is like colonialism and capitalism.
Yeah.
So it's not so much like neurology is sort of the indicator of like, will you do well in this system?
Yeah.
I mean, maybe those with ADHD traits are like more visibly like not able to thrive in some settings. But I find that, yeah, when I dig down, like not a lot of people are thriving in those settings, regardless of whether or not they have ADHD.
Yeah, it's sort of like a bare minimum, but it's not like an environment to promote excellence.
Yeah.
It's,
A lot of the demands of like modern society, because of capitalism and sort of these strains and pressures on us as individuals and families to like, you know, keep a roof over your head and like, you know, that's the main one. Like when you're in fight or flight over your basic needs, you're not really flourishing.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's complicated because like poverty's the baseline for people. Like people have built all the wealth that we get to enjoy, like our shelter and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And so capitalism, like I find this like a challenging one to blame, especially like for someone with ADHD not thriving. Since like Ned Hallowell, famous ADHD researcher, refers to the ADHD mind as the entrepreneurship trait.
Okay.
Which like entrepreneurship and capitalism are like a perfect marriage.
Right.
Our educational system is really not well set up for fostering that entrepreneurial mind
Right.
because it's trying to make employees.
Yeah.
But that entrepreneurship is where a lot of people with a fast brain thrive.
Yes. Totally. But I'm thinking of like Gabor Mate's Scattered Minds, which I've just read recently, and this idea of like emotional attunement.
Yeah.
So emotional attunement being often lacking in an ADHD person. And so even like I think a business environment or like a system you're participating in that incentivizes profit and kind of, you know, staking your territory. I'm not saying it's innately bad, but I'm saying I think what is incentivized often, it's shifting our attention to something. So like schools focusing on jobs or the workforce, and like capitalism incentivizing profit and entrepreneurship and whatnot. That's great. But I find that most people are like emotionally immature at the same time. And the more I work with kids, the more I kind of look at myself and realize how emotionally immature I am.
Yeah.
And how that like attunement piece
Hey, buddy.
that seems really big. So I don't know. I'm kind of losing my train of thought.
Yeah,
a
little
bit,
cat's distracting. Sorry, buddy. He doesn't do well with being locked up. So let's come back to the forest school and like sort of how it's working. Like I'm curious about like what does a day look like in the forest school? Like what kind of, are there specific like periods of classes or certain kinds of activities? Like what are the kids getting through the forest school that they're not getting in their homeschooling with mom and dad?
Okay, I'm hearing that question. I guess like we can like cut stuff out or whatever, because I'm a little bit divided between, am I talking with Liam or am I talking to this camera? But
yeah, well, that camera, whatever.
Yeah, no, I'm feeling like my thoughts aren't coming through very clearly. But I want to just come back a little bit to your question, or what were you talking about with this Ned guy?
Ned Hallowell, he refers to ADHD as the entrepreneurship trait.
Mm-hmm.
And so I just thought like in that way, like capitalism is the best economic model I know about for entrepreneurs, right? Like if you're in a highly regimented society with strict castes and responsibilities, like you're the son of a blacksmith, you're going to be a blacksmith. Having the entrepreneurial qualities are not necessarily well suited to that. But having the freedom of capitalism and this, you know, very creative world that definitely has some challenges. It's not a perfect system. But I think that works better than like a system where maybe it's like, well, you're the son of a farmer, go be a farmer.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, so I guess I see that as maybe a big contrast of our aims at the school is what maybe the sort of the teachery language is core competencies. So those qualities of personhood or even like cognition, but that are like the things you employ in all areas of your life, right? So it's, you know, the curriculum separates things into subject areas like science, but the core competencies are things that undergird like all your learning and all of your processes.
Yeah.
And schools typically don't do a great job of focusing on the core competencies. It's a required element, and so there's a lot of like lip service to it.
Yeah.
But when you get down to the core competencies, like it's communication, thinking, and personal and social competencies are the categories.
Yeah.
Creative and critical thinking, communication, and then personal and social has like personal awareness and responsibility, social awareness and responsibility, and then a positive personal and cultural identity.
Yeah.
So out of the, 6 maybe subcategories, most of them are interpersonal. Most of them are about your emotional maturity, your ability to relate with other humans.
Yeah.
So I feel like that's really the goal of what we're doing is you can learn how to read at home. You can learn how to read at school.
Yeah.
But there is this sort of like, there's a huge emphasis on literacy and numeracy in schools.
Yeah.
When that isn't the full picture. Like you can learn, you can, if you know how to read, but you don't know how to manage your emotions, like you're going to be in an interesting spot.
Yeah.
And that's where some of these, ADHD kids end up expelled because they're cognitively very strong, but all the turmoil of, managing your emotions, managing your reactions, resolving conflict with other humans, standing up for yourself, that's kind of what we're targeting.
Yeah.
And a lot of that is embedded in land-based learning. And like, I have tried to take cues from like indigenous ways of doing education. I'm not an expert by any means, but there's a clear connection between like being on the land and your own awareness of yourself and your place in the web of, a community or an ecosystem. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a stark.
Does that answer your question?
I think
I'm trying to elucidate it, but it's like the reason we do forest school is because you can't get, like, I'm interested in the curriculum of human flourishing.
Yeah, I think that's beautiful. I think that does strike me as like a stark contrast from the school that I knew growing up, because like, going into the regular public school, you don't even honestly feel like a cog in a machine. You feel like a totally disposable piece of whatever. Like,
right. You're the sawdust.
Yeah. The sawdust under the machine, or the broken, neglected saw blade. Yeah. Like, cause like what you're saying is totally relevant. If you can communicate well, honestly, in a lot of cases, it doesn't really matter what your resume looks like. If you can talk well with the person you need to talk with, you can get a new opportunity that will change your life. Doesn't matter how good you read. Like, you need a baseline for a lot of things, but that communication is way more important. And school, the communication it teaches is sit down and shut up and like do what you're told. And like, there's teachers that break that mold, and there's certain classes that allow for some variability in that. But yeah, a lot of these main classes are very one directional. It's like, I'm the teacher, I'm here to fill you with things.
Yep.
Whereas like, that interpersonal social aspect never really gets developed except for during recess, when it's just kids teaching kids.
Totally. And I mean, some people would probably argue that, there's plenty of socialization. But I think that's different than the like transmission of values, of social values. Well, maybe not different, because there are values being transmitted on the playground and in the classrooms, but they might not be the ones that we would really truthfully identify as like what we want for kids, right? Like, they learn, like, you know what I mean when I say like just, the playground mentality. Like, you can bully a kid because the information doesn't get back to the right people, and we don't know how to deal with conflict with kids, and so bullying can continue. that's a simplistic way of looking at it. But I think, yeah, there's a few things that jump to my mind about, because we're on the education train.
Yeah.
One is that there aren't a lot of ADHD teachers. There are definitely, they're out there, but typically the ones that seem to perform well and like find their way into education are very organized A-type minds. And I think that that's fine, but I think that it contributes to sort of like the cyclical nature of school just kind of being the same way that it was, because very organized people are organizing these spaces in the same ways.
Yeah.
And typically teachers have been successful in school. And so there's this overrepresentation of like academic types or like good students that are now in charge of the box.
Yeah.
And so the ways that that the not so good students are dealt with are kind of, I think, biased by that, right?
Yeah.
Because if you don't know what it was like to suck in school and feel all of the dynamics of that and the implications of like, okay, well now there's conflict with this authority figure, there's, I'm getting negative feedback at home because it's so performance based, and there isn't an interrogation of like, why am I not doing well? It's more like, pull your bootstraps up, or you're pulled from hockey team, the only thing that I love in this world. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like there's all these layers that don't feel like they're very sensible. But I think that's part of it, is like who ends up in charge.
Yeah.
And also the fact that schools employ behaviorism, right? I think we might have talked about this in the past, but behaviorism was codified by like Dr. Skinner.
Yeah.
And it's sort of in that Pavlovian realm where it's like you punish behavior you don't want to see and you reward behavior you do want to see.
Yeah.
It's very effective at controlling large groups of people, especially kids.
Yeah.
But it creates this rigid structure where you constantly have to be policing behavior.
Yeah.
And it's extrinsic motivation, right? So then if the teacher leaves the room, this is like the trope. Teacher leaves the room, absolute chaos.
Yeah.
But it's a self-fulfilling prophecy because we rely so heavily on this thing. Whereas I'm trying to, and some teachers are, many teachers are, trying to move away from this behaviorist model, this kind of punitive top-down model, to a more democratic model.
Yeah.
Where you treat school as more like a partnership, where it's like, I'm here as a facilitator. I've got lots of experience and lots of good ideas. I can help you brainstorm. I can help control the emotional temperature of this room too. I can help keep us safe. But at the end of the day, it comes down to you, right? As a student, what are you into? What are you going to do with your time? What are you going to put your effort into? And so there's sort of a move away from a lot of enforcement in our setting.
Yeah.
Kids have the option to say no if they don't want to participate in something.
I've never looked that deep into it either, but I've seen some stuff about like the Montessori school. It sounds what you're describing has some influence or some parallel to like Montessori. It feels like that's a lot of like letting people follow their own interests and fostering that, nurturing that. Mm-hmm. Is it, have you taken something from that, or I've
certainly seen, kind of the broad strokes of like the Montessori school of thinking, but I haven't done much like in-depth like reading into it or like employing it, I think. But there's probably a lot of shared territory just in where I've found myself. And I wonder too if like part of it has to do with our beliefs about learners.
Yeah.
If you think that someone is just this empty vessel and it's your job, oh my goodness, got to go to work, and like my job is to just put knowledge into a vessel, against their will half the time, then that's kind of that feels a little bleak to me. Whereas this more partnering model, the democratic model, is more like the belief is that you are already a capable thinking, learning machine. Yeah. Right. With all the abilities and probably already some of your own preferences, interests, values. So you're trying to tap into all of this wealth that's already in the room. Yeah. I see that as one of my, jobs and roles, is not to be like the guy
Yeah.
just putting into this empty vessel, but like, how do I activate what's already here?
Yeah. Yeah, that speaks to one of the big tragedies I see, especially in the ADHD space, but not exclusively, of like the modern school system, the way it usually works, is a lot of people think either they're not good learners or they don't like to learn or, but humans are just naturally learners. You can't stop it. It is impossible to stop learning. People want to learn, but when you force it on people or you like don't find a way to engage interest, and it's just like, here's what you have to learn, resistance comes up.
Yeah.
Or like people learn all kinds of things. Like I remember as a kid, I was like out turning over rocks and finding bugs and, had an encyclopedia on bugs. Years later, I took a biology class where we actually like learned about bugs. And, a lot of it was not new to me because I'd already been interested on my own accord. And that was just nurtured by my parents who picked up this encyclopedia somewhere.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think most people are like that. And maybe they don't want to learn anything. And I think it's an adult's responsibility to present the right environments for kids where, they want to learn about something other than the latest video game, hopefully. Like there might be a time and a place for that, but you want to learn things that are beneficial to society.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Totally. But I think that, part of the way that this sort of industrial model is set up, it works against students and families in the sense that, like, I hear this kind of pushback against the school system. It's like, we never learned how to do our taxes.
Yeah.
And I think that's maybe a fair point. Maybe you didn't. But generally, the schools, the high school math classes are teaching taxes, but you're not able to absorb that information because you're burnt out.
Yeah.
Like I said, from 9+ years of clerical work.
Yeah.
Right? Like that's what burns out these like awesome learning machines. They're just like, by the time you hit high school. Not to mention being, sort of, if you were a loud voice or like a, alternative thinker or a challenger, like you've been quite beat down, I think, by that point. So, I think the motivation piece is huge.
Yeah. Yeah. So we're resonating. Let's try to make it like a little more tangible because, I can't imagine we get 30 kids sitting on a log and you're like, we're going to learn about courage today, right? Like that's sort of one of those interpersonal virtues you might be trying to cultivate, but some of these virtues are not, they can't be inculcated like a math class.
Right.
How does it work?
Oh, that's a great question. And I think that comes back to sort of like that the core competencies are codified in our, provincial curriculum, but a lot of it is just lip service. Like you'll do like a little worksheet on a core competency. Does that establish and reinforce or support your positive personal identity? Doing like one worksheet a year that checks the core competency box? I don't think so. But again, why? Because that's the easiest way to make it like mappable data.
Yeah.
Whereas the actual process of transmitting values like courage, that's like complicated, messy, reflexive. It's different for every family and setting. So like, that's the challenge. A lot of what we do at the school at Heartwood is like just trying to figure it out, responding to needs, responding to, here's a flare up. What's going on there? We got to be detectives all the time.
Yeah.
Sometimes we're overtly talking about values, but I would say like I'm not quite sure what the answer is.
Yeah.
But again, I'm thinking about Gabor Mate and his advice for when a young person is like, I guess, so he has a few examples where he's like, a family will come to him at this point in his practice. He was doing like consultation for ADHD for kids and adults. He said a number of times families have come to me and been like, oh my goodness, we're pulling out our hair. Like it's just not working. Yeah. It's unfunctional in our home. Yeah. The needs, the emotional, turmoil, the roller coaster, the freak outs, like all this stuff. You won't listen. They won't listen. And his advice was like, before we talk about any kind of strategies or techniques or things to try, I just want you to go home and like focus on like attuning,
Yeah.
just being present,
Yeah.
unconditional positive regard, like pull off, like pump the brakes on all of these other things that you're trying to do
Yeah.
and the outcomes you want, like getting to school on time. He's like, get rid of that.
Yeah.
You're creating, in some ways you're creating the conflict there. Like, and he said like oftentimes the family will come back in 2 weeks and they're like, it's transformed.
Yeah.
We didn't do anything specific. We just attended to this human
Yeah.
and made ourselves available emotionally, and we're proactive in our attachment.
Yeah.
So, and you know, attachment is a huge part of our philosophy at the school. Just thinking in terms of young people needing healthy attachment to trusted adults.
Yeah.
That's one of our most effective tools,
Yeah.
is the attachment bond. And so parents employing that, that's a game changer before you even get to any like clinical suggestions and techniques.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes so much sense too, because even in managing my own ADHD, exploring that journey, so much of it has been about attuning to myself. Because when you really do slow down and learn to recognize what's going on inside emotionally, physiologically, you can make better choices about it. So like if I eat junk food, I feel it. And because of like, I went to this like meditation retreat that just like shuts you into yourself for a while, like highly recommended for anyone with ADHD. Take 10 days, go to the woods and don't say anything, of course. But like through doing that, I learned to like tune into myself, and I noticed like, oh, certain foods will make me lethargic or antsy, or if I don't say something in a certain situation, like if someone's, you know, gossiping or being mean, and I feel like something needs to be said, and I push that down, I feel nasty. And it's all these sort of situations where you don't sleep right, you stay up too late. Like I used to be one of those ADHD people who couldn't sleep but stay up all night. And through learning to like notice my feelings, I got way better at going to bed on time, because nothing was actually ever getting done late at night, just a whole lot of busy work. But it all came from like attunement, noticing what's happening more than strategy. Some of the strategies help once you're tuned in.
Yeah.
But if you can't get tuned in, like you might be getting angry without noticing or jealous without noticing. And all these things color your behavior.
Yeah. No, that's huge. Yeah. Yeah. Attuning to yourself, you know, like Gabor Mate talks about the self-parenting.
Yeah.
And I was like, whoa, when I read that, I was like, oh, the ability to just counsel yourself that like you're safe, you're good, and like you can make good choices.
Yeah.
Right? The stuff you say to a kid.
Yeah.
And how much I struggled with orienting myself that way. So that's super cool. Yeah, I think I've gained some of that ability to self-parent, but I feel like I'm just kind of unlocking it in the past like few years.
Yeah. Well, even like I was saying, the education system kind of thwarts that in a lot of ways. Like not all teachers, not all schools, but a lot of the factory model schooling. Like if you have a meltdown, you're just removed from the situation. There isn't time. It's inefficient to help you figure out why or help you figure out how to process that. So you don't learn to process it. No adult supports you in that. No community supports you. You probably get bullied by the kids about it. And so people are making it to adulthood. They're eating junk because they don't know better. They don't know what it feels like to eat well. They're angry or gossiping or complaining chronically or engaging in all kinds of destructive behaviors without being able to realize what's happening.
Yeah, totally. I mean, two thoughts are popping into my head. Like Gabor Mate often, points to the, like in the book Scattered Minds, at least. I've only read one of his books, but I feel like it was a really influential for me, so that's why I keep bringing it up. But he points to the sensitivity piece. Yeah. Which I had heard, like HSP, like I'm a highly sensitive person. I was kind of like, yeah, whatever. Yeah. it just felt like a, I don't know, a way of romanticizing like that you get pissed off.
Yeah.
But the way he puts it is in not just in terms of like emotional sensitivity, but also that physiological sensitivity, and like the cognitive side where you can get overstimulated by, tasks and mental effort. And so I think I've come around to that descriptor about sensitivity. And I wonder too if that contributes to even my own inability to sit with my stuff.
Yeah.
Right? Why do I not want to go to bed?
Yeah.
Because that moment of 5 minutes of just just doing absolutely nothing and letting all the things crowd in is like what I would try and escape.
Yeah.
And that's just kind of interesting to look back on. I think that I still feel that to some extent, but I think that becoming a father has forced me to really sit with stuff. Like there's not as much escape when there's a toddler that, needs you.
Yeah.
So I've had to work through almost against my will some of my own objections or reluctance to just sit and be. There's an awesome album or series of songs by Sleeping at Last that each song is connected to one of the 7 or 9 Enneagram types.
Okay.
And the type 7 song has a line that goes, "I feel like I'm sinking when I'm standing in one place." And for me, this was just a very visceral description of my experience in life.
Yeah.
This impulse to always be grasping or jumping ahead or filling my mind with some new thing.
Yeah.
And I think it's for the sake of the things, they're interesting enough, but really the novelty is a mechanism to escape whatever discomfort I was feeling. And whether does that come from that highly sensitive piece of the world is just kind of scary and unnerving. The realities are just kind of overwhelming. But at any rate, that image just spoke to me. And that I think is could summarize a lot of my accomplishments as a young person were almost incidental to my running away from being in one place. Yeah. And so this idea of self-parenting and self-esteem has been huge. Yeah. And in the past few years, just being able to, I think probably this year is the first time I've ever been able to be still and not feel like I'm literally sinking.
Yeah. So for parents who have got highly sensitive children or ADHD children who are trying to navigate educational systems, or even adults who are dealing with college, university, what have you figured out that you think might be helpful? What's worked for you?
Well, certainly one thing is I think, self-care is obviously a big feature of conversation nowadays. And Gen Z gets some flack too, right? For being too involved with self-care.
Yeah.
They don't know how to work through stuff. I don't buy that, but it's certainly in the ethos about self-care. But I think there's sort of two sides of the coin. One is what do I need? But also I think turning the camera around and saying what the system is demanding is inhumane.
Yeah.
For a lot of people and in a lot of settings.
Yeah.
We're exposed to it early and just kind of we sort of think, oh, this is how life works. You work whatever, you might work a 9 to 5 or you might work 60 hours a week and you get 2 days of holiday and is that living? Most people are I need my job, so I got a job, so I hate my life, but I look forward to those 2 extra days of holiday every year. Yeah, where I can escape to Cancun or whatever.
Yeah.
So this is also what I mean when I say coming back to capitalism and colonialism. I think this is the demands that we think are normal are inhumane.
Yeah.
So taking time to, I think, both attune to yourself to notice your needs, but also don't be afraid to push back against the inhumane demands.
Yeah.
I think most teachers that I know are working impossible hours.
Yeah.
That's just not healthy.
Yeah.
I can't. I think that I don't have the ability to just muscle through. Like maybe some neurotypical brains that I see are just like able to do these, superhuman hours.
120-hour work week.
Yeah, and I think they can manage it, but it's not really supporting them or contributing to their health or happiness. So sometimes you just kind of have to, and so maybe some people are good at this, and I just think that everyone struggles with it the same that I do. But just like when you're off, you're off. Don't answer the emails on the weekend. I went to the flip phone.
Yeah.
I tried to declutter my mind and my thought space and like take back some of my time and power in that way. But I think, does that make sense?
Yeah.
Like just pushing that back against sort of like what feels like you're obligated to do to be successful in a school setting or in a work setting, but you're really not.
Yeah.
At the end of the day, you always have the power to say like, "Fuck you, I quit."
Yeah.
And find other more humane ways to like occupy your time. And it's a double-edged sword because people need to put food on the table, and I think that it can be coercive at times, but really I think there's more options available if you're willing to, I don't know, make some sacrifices or like at least devolve away from what the assumed kind of standard picture is.
Yeah. Yeah, it makes me think of, there's this quote by a guy named Krishnamurti. I've never looked deep into his work, but this one quote is awesome. And it's no measure of health to be well adjusted to a profoundly sick society.
Mm-hmm.
Like, whoop-de-doo, you jumped through all the hoops for 12 years and now you got a grade 12 education.
Yeah.
It doesn't really matter. Like if you're failing in your education, especially if you're in like a standardized regular public education with a bunch of apathetic and disenfranchised teachers, if you're failing in that environment, good for you, honestly. like maybe that's a sign that you are not easy to coerce, and we do need people to push back, and maybe in many subtle ways, but the system is not made for humans. It's made for factory workers who now can be Optimus robots thanks to capitalism. But whatever. It's like there's so many domains of success, and if a regular institution of education isn't yours, that's okay. Like, don't give up on yourself. You might fit in somewhere else.
Yeah, certainly. And I think people, there's many people who can, excel in that setting. I don't know. As we're talking, I don't want to be too critical. I don't want to be too reductionist.
Yeah.
When we talk about the school system, I don't know, because it is so complex and there's so many humans involved. But I think it's fair to say at the end of the day that it's not conducive to most humans learning. Yeah,
there's absolutely like teachers who really do care, and some who go above and beyond. Like I remember in 4th grade, I had a teacher who, after hours, I don't remember exactly how it happened, there was like a voluntary class that was on logic. No one else, like it wasn't part of the curriculum. This teacher's just like, hey, if you guys want to do this class on logic, we're also doing that. And I remember taking that, and I feel so grateful for that. Like it was such a important structuring tool for my mind. I felt weird that it wasn't required. And so like, there's a lot of people who are trying really hard in a challenging system. Yeah. So what about for parents? Like if you're working with homeschoolers, what can parents do to help with these core competencies, help their children, develop those social skills, those virtues and values?
Yeah, great question. So I think definitely like 2 things occur to me. One is that the attachment lens is really important for me. I think it's crucial. So your relationship with your child is one of those most effective mechanisms for growth.
Yeah.
And Gabor Mate talks about in his book, like oftentimes, like especially with an ADHD child, but I think a lot of these extend to just like everyone's experience.
Yeah.
Oftentimes you have to choose between the short-term outcomes and the long-term development
Yeah.
of the child. So the example is you're always late to school because there's this, common trend. Child wakes up late, is unmotivated. As the time ticks on, the parent is feeling the time pressure, feeling the stress. We've got to get to, so that there's elevated, emotion in the home that leads to like, conflictual communicating, and like you end up blowing a gasket and yelling and forcing the kid into the car at the expense of, the relationship to a degree, right? It affects it negatively.
Yeah.
And he says, like, sometimes you just need to get them into the car. Like, that's just parenting.
Yeah.
But he's just wants parents to be aware that you're choosing between the development or the outcome.
Yeah.
Because definitely more often with like that, highly sensitive child, everything you do is affecting the attachment relationship. It's either strengthening it or degrading it.
Yeah.
And most of those power struggles that are so important and sensible for an adult are not obvious to the child. Right?
Yeah.
They don't hear the logic behind, if you're late to school, then you're not gonna learn what you need. You're gonna be missing content or whatever. But all that's transmitted is like the anger, the frustration, and oftentimes maybe a little bit more of like, like a more strong response from the parent, forcing.
Yeah.
So yeah, that attachment lens is huge. And I think that parents, I've been kind of, working on, I've been sort of grappling with this theory for a bit, that parents are kind of dumb in that when a child comes into the world, you're on alert, like your instinctive mode kind of kicks in because you're like, I got to do everything for this child.
Yeah.
So you're more susceptible to, I think, like marketing and propaganda. More susceptible to some of this bad thinking floating around because you don't have the luxury of like really parsing out and like examining what you're being given, right? You're just like in more of a knee-jerk mode.
Yeah.
So like the example for me is that I was in Walmart and Caspian was a few months old and there was baby sunglasses.
Yeah.
I was like, I have to buy these baby sunglasses for his eyes. His eyes. He's going to go blind. And I was like, whoa. I don't need to pay $40 for these baby sunglasses because babies are not going to stare at the sun.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know what I mean? Now, I've gotten pushback and flack from this theory because apparently, with the ozone degradation, that glasses are important for children. Okay, fine. Leaving that aside, the idea that, again, it's this empty vessel versus this like, in this already existing person kind of model. Like a baby won't look at the sun because we'll go, ow, and we'll close our eyes and we'll turn away.
Yeah.
It's too bright.
Yeah.
There's already a person at work, albeit, as a baby, very, very like underdeveloped. But so I think of that a lot, that like, what are the things that are being promoted to me to, convince me of something? Are they true or not for my child? And a lot of the pressures that parents feel are about, performance. And like, I need to like tune up this little person like they're a startup. They need to be like optimized. When actually, developmentally, humans do really well to have like dead space.
Yeah.
Boredom. Iterating. Like having no real purpose except for messing around with stuff. Like, loose parts. Whittling. Like just give them some tools. Give them some things to embody and just to poke around in the world with.
Yeah.
And like, I think arguably some of the best inventors in history have come from just poking around.
Yeah.
And so, that's sort of what I think of when I think of for like, what message would I give to parents is like, relax. You don't need to treat your child like there's, I use this analogy a lot is like a cabinet. Are you building cabinets or are you tending a garden? Because a cabinet requires the absolute expertise and finesse of a cabinet maker. Like any small measurement and this thing is off.
Yeah.
You know, the finish has to be perfect. Like everything has to there's some very rigid criteria of like how this is going to fit into the wall, into the kitchen, all this stuff.
Yeah.
It's not going to build itself.
Yeah.
It needs you entirely to imprint and build.
Yeah.
So that's that empty vessel kind of analogy. Whereas I think a child truly is more like a garden where the DNA is all there.
Yeah.
That plant is going to grow. It is made to grow. You just need to make sure that nothing kills it outright.
Yeah.
The plant
Yeah.
and the child, arguably.
Yeah.
Make sure there's sun and water. And just it's attunement too, right? The gardener's there
Yeah.
to see what's going on, maybe nudge and influence a bit, but the plant's doing the work. The plant's doing the growing. The plant knows exactly what it's going to be.
Yeah. That's
That's hard. It's easy to, I don't know. It's easy to say is really hard to live
Yeah.
and embody. Like I'm a parent now, and I can, say these things to the parents in my program. And then I go home and I'm like, grappling with my fear about every little thing that could possibly happen.
Yeah.
Are we doing enough? Should I have gotten more safety measures in the home? And it's even things like that, trusting the balance of a young person. Like,
Yes. Sort of sounds like
I'm going on so many tangents here.
no, it's
but-
beautiful though, and I think they're great. And I think one of the synthesis of what you were saying is one of the best things you could do for a child who's developing is cultivate yourself. Like if you want your child to be more regulated, regulate yourself.
Yes,
If you want your child to be kind and disciplined and on time, like be kind and disciplined and on time, and hopefully they'll pick that up. It's
Yeah.
more likely they will if you do it than if you just say it.
Totally. But I think, having that unconditional positive regard is what builds and strengthens the attachment relationship. So you hope that these values are being transmitted. You hope you model them well, but they might in their own selfhood be like, I don't care about that.
Yeah.
And you have to be willing to let go of the control piece because you're not building the cabinet that's everything you wished you were.
Yeah.
You have to let it be what it is. And oftentimes there's this kind of caveat or condition to the way we treat kids. It's like I'm happy and I'm loving as long as you do X, Y, Z.
Yeah.
And that's not to say there aren't natural limits and consequences that a family needs to have. But generally, if it's strings attached, it's not going to be contributing to the development emotionally and intellectually of a child.
Yeah. Yeah, that's...
They need to have room to have a tantrum, make poor decisions, and it's not going to be punitive.
Yeah.
Which flies in the face of what most generations I feel like have been taught. The last few years, I mean, society's sort of I think changing their methods towards child rearing in terms of punishment in the last few generations. But, when you hear of what our grandparents did and experienced, and then our parents did and experienced, now my generation, there is a softening, but generally it's maybe just the coercion changes forms.
And
But
sometimes
we're still so focused on controlling.
And sometimes it comes you get the anti-problem. You get another problem from the other side where if you've checked out Carol Dweck's book Mindset, highly recommended to anyone listening, even listen to a summary of it or sure she's probably got a TED Talk or something. It talks about how we develop the fixed mindset and it comes from strings attached. You're only praised if you achieve, and sometimes it's being praised for achievement. So it's not always you're punished if you fail. It could even be, a well-meaning parent being like, wow, you're so smart or you're so talented. And you hear that over and over and over again. And if you try it, when you're trying something, you need to fail. Sometimes that the process of getting good requires failing and stumbling and making mistakes and consciously evaluating those mistakes and changing course. But if you're always praised for like, oh, you did so, oh, like you're so smart, instead of you worked so hard on that,
Yeah.
that can create that limitation in the same way.
Totally.
Your self-worth is still tied up in like, oh, mom and dad loves me
Because
when I'm smart,
Yeah.
instead of like,
They love me.
just they love me. Yeah.
Yeah.
I've had the problem with the label of ADHD for a little bit here, and that's because, well, hence the podcast. It's the art of ADHD. I think a lot of the most interesting and like the most beautiful and incredible people I know check a lot of diagnostic boxes. A lot of them are even resistant to getting a diagnosis themselves. Some of them have one. Some of them read about it and are like, yeah, that sounds like me. But because it's pathologized as a disorder,
Yeah.
a lot of people don't want to look at the label. And then some people who do look at the label, because it's a disorder, they think, like I do check some of these boxes. All these other things about it must also be true about me. And I think people create this this limiting picture of themselves.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'm not really into the label ADHD, but we're sort of, I got the grant for the podcast, and so we got to like stick with it at least for a few more episodes.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. Well, and something that I thought was interesting in Scattered Minds as well is he says like it's a disorder of scope, not of category.
Yeah.
So it's not like the things you struggle with ADHD are like completely alien to the other, to a non-ADHD person.
Yeah.
Like ideas of like, self-esteem, time management, emotional regulation. Like these are the struggles of humans,
Yeah.
but elevated to a point of impediment
Yeah.
that is like more noticeable than the average person.
Yeah.
But it means it's hard to pin down. Am I just under so much stress and I haven't paid attention and it's coming out in unhealthy ways? Or am I chemically dealing with something slightly different than the person next to me?
Yeah.
Am I scattered and inattentive, or do I have a sleep schedule because I don't take care of myself? Like, do you know what I mean? It's muddy.
Yeah, and I think these things are that's one of the other issues is like so many people are like, I have ADHD, and they drink beer every night. Or yeah, they stay up late. They're
Yep.
playing video games. And it's true that the people who are described as having ADHD might be more susceptible to negative habits and patterns of addiction. So, okay, maybe it pushes you through that door. But if you keep walking through it, it's going to get worse.
Yeah.
And so, and like humans have neuroplasticity. We can rewire our brains.
Yes.
So your
Well-
ADHD, could it be fixed or managed with sleep,
Yeah.
not drinking, eating better? Like,
Yeah. Totally. And I think that Gabor Mate in his book Scattered Minds does a good job of like striking the balance. He's saying we're not denying the genetics, but we're also not denying that the choices you make in your lifestyle heavily impact your brain and your health,
yeah,
right? Because I was resistant to reading Scattered Minds for a while because I had heard that he sort of takes this trauma-based perspective,
yeah,
which I think some people extrapolate to mean he's like an ADHD denier and it's like all based on environmental factors. But that's not really the case. He's very intentional about saying there are genetic differences. And a lot of that has to do with the sensitivity, both of the mind and the body of a child. Oftentimes there's that correlation between, your sensitivity to like stimulation, mentally or emotionally, but also just like, the classic thing, textures,
yeah,
temperatures, sound, So, like I said, I was resistant for a while because I thought I don't want to be one of those people that's like, you just need to fix it.
yeah,
And if that was one of those voices, I wasn't really interested in hearing it. But I'm glad I read it because not only does it not do that, it doesn't say like, just fix it, but it does point to the neuroplasticity, like you said,
Yeah.
that we are so adaptive, that brains are such highly tuned instruments,
Yeah.
you know, especially like when, you know, amongst the animal kingdom, like human brains are like incredible, that if you ignore that, then you're missing a huge part of the picture.
Yeah. Yeah. And then like, if the label has the word disease in it or disorder,
Yeah.
then like it becomes really hard to see this flexibility. And,
Right.
you know,
Yeah.
because like when I say I don't like the label, it's not because I don't think it's challenging. Like if people with ADHD who meet those diagnostic criteria, they often do have a very challenging life. I've had a
Yeah.
lot of challenges because
Yeah.
of the difference of my brain.
Mm-hmm.
But
And I mean, it's hard to gauge when you look at, it's hard to figure out or get a sense of how difficult is my life compared to other lives,
yeah,
right?
like who can say?
It is really hard, but I feel like my partner and I, we kind of feel like my life is hard. Like she even said, you know, it feels like your life's really hard based on these things you're describing, based on how hard it is sometimes to accomplish things that for other people don't seem to be as hard. But
Yeah. But then other things for this kind of brain are easier than they are for other people.
yeah, totally.
Like a lot of people are afraid to start new projects. Some with ADHD, it's not like universally
Is that a
ADHD is
thing?
going to help you. Some people with ADHD can't start projects, but some, oh boy, I can start projects.
Right, but they're not afraid to start the project.
Yeah, and
They
a
just
lot
struggle with starting the project, right?
sometimes, but some can do it, some can't. But
Yeah.
but neurotypical people, they need an assignment sometimes.
Yeah.
You know, they're not going to start a project on their own, like
Right.
like not universally. But
Yeah.
I over the years before I knew I had ADHD, I'd be at parties sometimes. I'd be like, "What do you like to do for fun?" And people would be like, "Video games or TV," and I'd be like, I'm getting into lino cutting and like, you know, knitting,
kettlebell juggling.
kettlebell juggling.
Yeah.
Yeah, like I'm always trying to find new things. And I think that's part of the gift of my brain's quest for novelty.
Yes.
And you look at a lot of the most influential people alive, like they certainly don't have normal brains. Many of them are on a quest, even historical, like Leonardo da Vinci. What's he doing making theater props and like war machines and
Yeah.
painting amazing pictures,
Propeller vehicles.
studying physics on his own time?
Yeah.
Like that's not a normal brain.
Yeah.
So
Totally.
was he disordered?
Well, and it's funny that you say like disorders in the name, because you think you'd be able to, even if you say, but it's not a disorder, it's not a disease, it's still in there, and we're so susceptible to those kinds of suggestions,
Yeah.
right? Like I was reading this book recently, Daniel Kahneman, Thinking Fast and Slow, and he talks about a study where just reminding someone of old people
Yeah.
caused them to physically walk slower as they exited the test.
Yeah.
So like the power of suggestion to actually influence your physical body.
Yeah.
Just by being reminded that old people existed, they were walking like statistically measurably slower.
Yeah.
Like, oh, how crazy is that?
Yeah, and that's the power of the label. If you're given this label day after day that points to a problem, well, you're going to be looking for a problem,
Yeah.
and a lot of people find it and they get stuck there, and it
Yeah.
breaks my heart because a lot of those people are really incredible.
Well, and I think the neuroplasticity piece is important because, like you mentioned, you know, growth mindset. If you think this is who I am, I think that there's an important step of like saying you need to love yourself, and you need to say like, I love who I am. It's not, you don't want to deny the realities that you live with.
Yeah,
But I think if you say, and lean too heavily on this kind of genetic explanation of ADHD, this is who I am,
yeah,
then it's easy to see how you could get stuck in that fixed spot. Oh, well.
yeah.
And then you just start accommodating some of the dysfunctions. rather than saying, this is my brain, but it is changeable.
Yeah.
And humans are incredibly changeable on a, cognitive, physiological level, emotional, psychic level. We can grow, we can develop. And in the book, in Scattered Minds, Gabor Mate says, the antidote to underdevelopment is development.
Yeah.
Right? So if you look around, you're like, man, I suck at emotional regulation. You could live there, but you don't have to. And you can grow. Like, you can still continue to grow. And that's huge for me.
Yeah.
That was actually, probably one of the most liberating things I've learned in a long time was Scattered Minds. And just that idea that you can move past some of the stuff that is impeding you.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think one of the other issues with the label for me is I think it speaks to our cultural hyperfixation on things like productivity. Like, productivity is great, and you should be productive.
Right.
As much as you can be productive. Also, be kind and loving and curious and, friendly. And, there are so many ways to be a gift to the world that aren't hinging on your ability to complete projects in a timely manner. That's cool to complete projects in a timely manner. Awesome if you can complete projects in a timely manner. Also, great if you can be kind and loving. Like, how many lonely people are there out there who just need a friend? If you can be a friend, that's a great gift. And a lot of ADHD people are sort of like dogs, and they make great friends to people.
Totally.
Yeah.
Yep. Totally. It reminds me of, so with the school, we're studying the 4 food chiefs, which is like this Silk's worldview, and there's like a few attributes that go with each of the food chiefs. So Chief Salmon is one, and there's this symbolism of like efficacy and action that goes along with it, and then there's that's an important trait. Like you're saying, it's great to be able to complete projects in a timely manner, but that isn't the be all end all, because maybe what is needed is to be able to look away from the task and say, oh, there's a person who needs something from me. Right. And so that might be its chief bitterroot that is about nurturing and inclusion and governance, but also that ability to like not be focused so much on the task, but also who are the people around us, and are their needs being attended as we accomplish our goals. So that's just fresh in my mind as we've been kind of studying it. But an important feature is that you can't just be one, and a community certainly can't just have one of these types and one of these expressions of being, because you would suffer for it, right? It's not viable to just be locked into one way of being. You need every person's skills to be this kind of cohesive whole, and you need every voice at the table to like make the best decisions. And
and sometimes even like another piece of this, the hard things are what makes life beautiful. And so like I had one client I was working with he's a musician, and he was telling me about how much he was struggling with his emotional regulation and how he wished he could just manage his emotions. And I was like, I understand, because it's hard to have big feelings. But I'm like, look, imagine if all your musical heroes were perfectly stoic and capable of managing their emotions.
Right.
How boring would Spotify be if you had a bunch of perfectly emotionally regulated musicians? A lot of the time, like I feel like the people who can feel biggest, these artists, these musicians, these creators,
right? These highly sensitive people
give us like a cathartic access to feelings that we don't know how to process on our own. Like the ones who can feel harder help the ones who can feel less feel better. Like,
Totally. But that there is an interesting relationship between, I think, like there's an interesting relationship between art and I think, what would I say? Neurodiversity, almost, I want to say like art and dysfunction,
Yeah.
right? Because I feel like my most rich creative times of my life were also my most dysregulated times of life.
Yeah.
So I think I'm grappling with that right now, feeling like the healthier I get, the more I feel a little bit like I'm losing the vivaciousness of the life of my earlier experience of life,
Yeah.
which is a weird, bittersweet thing.
Yeah.
Like I'm leaning into it. I want to be comfortable, standing in one place without feeling like I'm drowning. But also, it feels like the volume has been turned down on just the excitement and exuberance that I felt for life when I was doing things, like it's like the party life.
Yeah.
You go to a party, you talk to strangers, you smoke, you drink, there's stimulation, and in the end, I've chosen to not participate in a lot of those things. They're not conducive to my health. But I also feel like I'm losing something, or I'm missing out on something that I used to chase.
Yeah.
So I'm not sure what to think of that.
Yeah. Well, I
what
think
to make of it.
again, it ties back to my problem with the pathologizing of certain types of brains.
Right.
Because, yeah, like maybe, it isn't healthy and conducive to your life to do that all the time, or maybe anymore. Mm-hmm. Maybe that phase of your life is over. But I do think it is conducive to a healthy society for people to stir things up.
Right.
And sometimes that's messy. Sometimes you get splashed.
Yeah.
But productivity and efficiency isn't. Imagine the most productive and efficient society you can. Mm-hmm. You don't want to live there.
Yeah.
You want to live somewhere that, like, I think a lot of tangents, but coming back, I think flowers are a very interesting thing because they're not productive. They're not really useful. Women love them. I like them too, but they're like,
I mean,
but this part of me is like, it's a waste.
They could be medicine. They could be food, but
yeah, you could be growing food for people. You could be growing.
No, I'm saying, but flowers can be food too.
Sometimes they can be food. I've eaten a lot of flowers, but a lot of them are kind of like just a good garnish. They're not really like sustenance.
Right. Yeah.
But they're just sort of
saying something that doesn't have like an immediate kind of productive value.
Yeah. And so I think I've heard metaphors about like neurodiversity as like being a flower. And like, if you're expecting everything to be a rose, then the lilies aren't going to look so good.
Right.
Worse still, if you're expecting everything to be potatoes, carrots, tomatoes, like productive things, well, like, we're missing out on a lot of the beauty of life. And sometimes being perfectly well adjusted is not, it's not all we need.
No, that's fair. That's fair. Yeah, and that sometimes I guess that label of ADHD is also, it's always in contrast to this sort of mythical norm, right? But it is the individual skill sets and passions and whatever that do make life interesting. And
I like how you labeled it the mythical norm. I saw a meme the other day regarding the mythical norm, and it's basically globally.
A man named Norm.
No, globally, the average...
You see him in the woods. Just...
It's actually probably not in the woods, but no, globally, the average man is a Chinese Hindu named Muhammad who's 5'6", weighs 170 pounds, and makes $10,000 a year. Right. Like, that guy doesn't exist, obviously. But, like, on the average, that's what we got.
Yeah.
And so, there's no normal.
Yeah. Totally. It's the worst, or it's the least helpful picture when you're trying to, take that, whatever the median example. Yeah. Interesting. And so then vast, I mean, I like it just poetically because it's a vast scape.
Yeah, I think it is a little bit better. It's more neutral.
Vast
more
potential.
Open. Yeah.
And that was probably reverse engineered, right?
Yeah.
One of those acronyms that you're like, you didn't That's not a coincidence.
Yeah, it's on purpose. So for people who don't know, VAST is the variable attention stimulus trait. I think Ned Hallowell also might have coined that.
Okay.
And
Yeah, which
Yeah.
which is I think just at first glance too much more appropriate because attention deficit is such a misnomer.
yeah,
You know, I don't have a deficit of attention if I'm interested in it,
yeah,
and that's why I kind of not avoided, but I didn't really identify with ADHD for most of my life because of that. I could focus so intensely and heavily on something for so long.
Yeah.
I was like, well, there's no way I'm attention deficit. Look at me go.
yeah,
But variable attention,
yeah,
pointing to your attention can be incredibly varied, but just depending on what it is,
yeah,
you can go, it can be impossible or some of the most, focused.
yeah, yeah. And I think from what I understand, the diagnostic for variable attention stimulus trait
Yes.
differs from ADHD too, in that they're keeping under the umbrella people who have ADHD-like symptoms, but maybe weren't born with it. People who maybe developed it through years of playing video games, abusing substances, scrolling social media,
Right.
these other factors that are totally relevant in how our brain operates. So
Right,
even, whether
right.
you got ADHD or not
Yeah,
ADHD, that those ADHD things can develop and
Yeah.
can be remedied by
Totally.
consciously attending to what you're attending to.
Right. But I mean, having variable attention or your attention varying based on your interest or importance, like that's also not a dysfunction. Like
Yeah.
that's just a human, I think. That's just a thing.
Yeah.
That your attention isn't going to be exactly the same for everything you put your focus on,
Yeah.
right? I think in any brain.
Yeah.
So I wonder what the criteria is then before it gets labeled as a variable attention stimulus trait.
Yeah.
Does it need to be at the level of impediment?
Yeah.
Or is that where the difference is? Like ADHD has to do with impediment.
Yeah.
Like this is now impeding my life versus just, I don't know. Does that make sense? Like,
Yeah.
'cause,
Like,
I don't know.
yeah,
It
'cause
doesn't seem
everyone
like
does
it's a
have-
bad thing to have variable attention.
yeah, I think they still mostly use it almost like a diagnostic, right? Like it's not a disorder. It's a difference.
It's a trait
It's
that
a
is
trait,
noticeable.
and it can be challenging and problematic.
Yes.
But yeah, it doesn't seem to carry the same baggage as a disorder.
Yeah. Yeah. I definitely relate to having a lot of friends with ADHD, I think.
Yeah.
Like when I kind of do the quick informal survey, I'm like, yep, there's a lot of them. And I think like attracts like in that way of like, so interesting. People who are pursuing all these diverse fields of work and hobbies and reading all these crazy books and doing all these crazy things. Like, yeah, those are the people that I gravitate to because it's interesting. It's compelling.
Yeah. Yeah, and obviously they've driven society, like, 'cause we're not exactly living in a super traditional world. There are people who are breaking the mold every generation in every direction. And, like, obviously there are some growing pains in our society with that, but I'm pretty grateful to have indoor plumbing and refrigeration. And my great grandparents didn't have that
Right.
for a lot of their lives.
Yeah.
So some of these people who think differently, think outside the box, are committed to whatever strange vision they have.
Yeah.
They're the people we need.
Totally. And I totally agree, but I think that the ideas of progress are very much like these sirens calling from the waves.
Yeah.
There's this awesome quote by E.O. Wilson, I think, talking about an evolutionary chimera
Yeah.
where we have Paleolithic emotions, medieval institutions, and godlike technology.
Yeah.
And so kind of bring it back to like this idea of like core competencies and what do I really care about in terms of like the work that I do with kids and my own learning and growth. It comes back to emotional maturity.
Yeah.
And I think that that's like when you talk about traditional society, I think traditional society had emotional maturity
Yeah.
because part of it is like you don't have innumerable things to pursue. Like you have to like work alongside a family and you do these things. So more like these like agricultural societies, I think that they just naturally lend themselves to emotional regulation.
Yeah.
And that's where I think, if I think big picture, when we look at some of these scary problems of the world, climate crisis, political polarization to an extreme,
Yeah.
Mental health crisis in rising statistically in young people and all this stuff, I think it's that partly you start fresh with every generation,
Yeah.
right? Like, sure, technology doesn't, but humans start fresh every generation. Emotionally,
Yeah.
you're starting from scratch. So it doesn't matter how powerful your machines are, because the same a human is getting in and operating every one of them. Presumably,
Yeah.
I think you get my point, is every weapon, every vehicle, every machine, every innovation is driven by just a human who has had one generation, or one childhood, one life to figure out their values and their emotional landscape.
Yeah.
And that, I think, is the crux of sort of some of our societal problems and dilemmas, is that we forget how much it takes to actually create a healthy, wise, trustworthy human being.
Yeah.
And it's these fundamentals, like, being bored and being like caring for the plants and animals.
Yeah.
Like the way we think of and treat the earth is often the way we will treat our fellow human being. Right?
Yeah.
Those are kind of inextricable, but often ignored. It's like, we're disconnected from nature because we don't actually need to care about nature. We don't need to care about birth.
Yeah.
We were talking about this earlier. Most people have never seen a birth
Yeah.
because you don't have to. You can be totally detached from this absolutely fundamental, pivotal part of every family and every community. Whereas in earlier epochs of, humans, there you would have seen multiple,
Yeah.
several. It's just present. It's something you're familiar with. And I think things like birth and death need to be close to our psyche to keep us healthy.
Yeah.
When we're too disconnected, we go a little haywire,
Yeah.
I think. Anyway, so that's like a kind of a tangent, but it points to, sort of why I'm doing what I'm doing, is I think at the end of the day, my best bet for my family is to get my shit together internally.
Yeah.
And I hope to promote that and support that in the education work that I do, in the relationships I have.
Well, that's beautiful, Nygel. Do you still have space for students? How's it work when people want to join a forest school?
That's a good question.
It'll be like a year, so like maybe it doesn't matter, but like like if someone's curious about the forest school, where can they find out more?
You can find us with a web search for Navigate NIDES. And
How do you spell
Heartwood
NIDES?
program. So NIDES is NIDES,
Okay.
which is an acronym for the school itself, which is the North Island Distance Education School.
Yeah.
It's not a huge program. We do have some spaces still for next year. But yeah, that's how someone would go about finding out about us. You can always send me an email as well.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm just thinking, I didn't expect so much about the school and like about education. I guess I should have expected that
Yeah.
coming on as like that being my background
Yeah.
as an educator. But yeah,
Well, that's okay. I think you did great. I love chatting with you. It's neat to like education and learning is one of my favorite subjects. So thanks so much for joining me today.
absolutely. Thank you for having me. It was great.